I worked a quiet stretch of the southern demilitarized zone, the kind officers were supposed to be grateful for. My name is Park Hyun. I am a lieutenant in the Republic of Korea Army, infantry branch, posted to a sector where the war exists as fences, minefield charts, and ceremony. On paper, my job is simple: walk the lines, check the cameras, log harmless trespasses from deer and drunken villagers, and make sure my conscripts do not turn boredom into an incident the news can use. The first strange thing came from the ground. That night began like any other. Low clouds sat over the hills and smothered the stars. The perimeter lights washed the wire and warning signs in tired yellow. Beyond the last fence, the valley dropped into dark scrub and old scars we were told not to dwell on. I walked the gravel track above the minefield with my squad strung out behind me. Boots on stone, gear clinking, the usual rhythm. Sergeant Choi trailed closer than regulation, hands in his pockets until he noticed me glance back. He was old army, nearly at his pension, the kind of non-commissioned man who knew the DMZ before half my conscripts were born. "You hear from home yet, sir?" He shifted his rifle on its sling. "New Year call," I said. "Same questions, same complaints." "Your grandmother still keeping that picture in the living room?" "She wiped the frame with alcohol first, then put it back in the same place," I said. "You know how it is." Everyone in uniform had a photo like that somewhere. Mine showed my grandfather in black and white, wearing an old pattern field cap, caught mid-blink outside a dugout. The family story said he vanished in a Chinese tunnel offensive under this same general valley. No body, just a letter full of phrases about sacrifice and honor. My grandmother never accepted the absence as an ending. She called it a pause, then stopped talking about it. A radio call cut through the night. "Fox 1, this is Station Tango. Need the lieutenant at the screen for a minute. Over." I keyed my handset. "Station Tango, Fox 1. On my way. Over." The seismic station sat in a prefab box near the sector command post, a leftover from some joint project no one fully remembered. We were supposed to keep people from stealing its solar panels and check the printouts twice a day. Most officers treated it as busy work. I left Choi to finish the patrol and cut across the gravel toward the post. The guard at the door swung it open without a word. Inside, the air felt close and warm from coffee and old electronics. A bank of monitors glowed at one end of the room. Corporal Min hunched over them, thin and pale, our designated technician because he was smart and hated being outdoors. He waved me over and jabbed at a screen. "Look at this, sir." The display showed a strip chart. Time on the bottom, motion on the side. A thin line ran across, steady except for regular clusters of sharp, narrow spikes. "Tremor activity." I leaned closer. "Shallow, repeated, same zone." Min tapped a small map in the corner of the display. "Depth estimate comes back the same every time. The waveform is clean, like a machine. The baseline on either side is flat." The map showed our sector outlined in green. One patch of hillside pulsed red in a steady rhythm. The label over it came from a very old database. Infiltration Complex, neutralized, 1953. I knew the hill. Everyone on this line did. It sat 2 ridgelines out, a low swell under scrub behind rusted fence posts and sagging warning boards. Old paperwork said Chinese forces used tunnels there during the war. Later paperwork said the tunnels were collapsed and flooded. A concrete plug went in. A small stone marker followed. That was supposed to be the end. "What triggered the alarm?" I asked. "I set a threshold for man-made patterns after that last artillery test," Min said. "This fits. Depth estimate hits the same number every cycle. No storm activity in the logs, no blasting permits." "How long has it been doing this?" "Started with single hits every few minutes," he said. "Now it's bunching. Movement, rest, movement, like a digger that works in pulses." "Glitch?" I asked. I rechecked calibration twice. He lifted a shoulder. "If it's a glitch, it's a very disciplined one." On the map, The red patch flashed. The line spiked in a tight burst, settled, then spiked again to almost the same height. The regularity bothered me. The Earth shakes on its own schedule. Soldiers like packets and routines. "Save everything," I said. "Print out the last cycle. Dump the logs, I'll call it in." On my way to the secure phone, I passed the small memorial wall outside the command post. Our sector commander had hung it there to remind conscripts that the DMZ was not just a tourist line. Faces in old uniforms looked out from cheap frames. My grandfather's photo hung near the edge, because my mother had mailed us a copy when I got this posting. The angle of his cap always made him look slightly amused, as if someone had cracked a joke behind the photographer. The tremor line under the hill kept stepping up. Movement. Pause. Movement. The duty officer at battalion headquarters listened without arguing. Seismic anomalies near the DMZ fell into a grey zone. Civilian institutes cared, but so did intelligence. I gave my grid reference and read out the label from the old database. Silence stretched at the other end of the line, the kind that meant an officer was reading something on his screen and disliking it. "An engineering detachment is already scheduled for your sector this week," he said at last. "We'll move them up. Your unit will support. Escort them to the site, secure the perimeter, and provide observations. Do not touch anything until they arrive. Understood?" "Yes, sir." When I stepped outside, Sergeant Choi sat on the step, smoking in violation of 3 regulations. "You look like someone cancelled your leave," he said. "Command is sending engineers," I told him. "They're very interested in our old Chinese friends." His eyes shifted toward the dark mass of the hills. "Which side?" he asked. "North of Marker 7. "Old tunnel complex," I said. "The one with the cracked stone and the broken fence." He exhaled smoke and stared down at his boots. "My father's platoon used to call that place Hungry Mouth," he said. "You know why? I'm sure you're going to tell me. It kept asking for people. They threw soldiers and explosives into it, and it kept opening." I thought about my grandmother's habit of avoiding the news whenever tunnel incidents came up. "She used a different name," I said. "Something from an old story. Same idea." Choi crushed the cigarette under his heel. "Advise the engineers to be quick," he said. "I don't like that hill." He was not a man given to drama. I took his warning more seriously than I would have from a conscript. Command moved faster than I expected. By morning, 2 trucks with engineer markings sat inside our wire. The team leader flipped through a tablet in the back, while his sappers unloaded gear, drills, charges, cutting tools, portable supports, and more sensors than I had seen in one place since training. They joked about cave-ins and spiders. None of them had spent more than a day on this line. I climbed into the lead truck with the team leader, Captain Lee, and pointed the driver toward the old complex. "Last survey was when?" Lee asked. "Officially, the plug was inspected 5 years ago," I said. "Unofficially, that means someone drove past, ticked a box, and went home." "Any stories?" He grinned at his tablet. "There are always stories. Old tunnels, old dead, the usual." "Good," he said. "Bad tunnels make budgets. Maybe we can finally rip this one out and put in something that doesn't leak." He thought like an engineer. I thought about the way the tremor graph had walked upward in neat steps. We parked just inside the rusted fence. The hill looked unimpressive up close, a low slope under patchy brush, chunks of concrete peeking through where soil had slid. The original tunnel entrance was just a flat grey face poured into the rock, cracked and streaked with mineral stains. On either side, faded signs warned in 3 languages about unexploded ordnance and restricted zones. A small stone marker leaned near the path, half sunk into the dirt. The inscription said the complex had been sealed in the name of peace and stability. Someone had jammed a cigarette filter into the crack at the top. The engineers walked up with clipboards and handheld sensors. My squad spread along the fence, weapons slung, eyes on the tree line and the minefield beyond. It felt like any routine inspection until the first drill bit touched the old concrete. One sapper hammered a steel pin into a crack and clipped a sensor to it. The pin trembled after he stopped hitting it, and the vibration settled into a steady thrum that travelled up the cable and made the sensor housing buzz in his hand. He frowned and braced it against his chest. "Feels like something pushing back," he muttered. Captain Lee hustled over with a tablet, watched the readout and scowled. "Depth?" he asked. "Too shallow," Min said from behind me. He had joined us with the portable seismic gear, eager to see how the field unit matched his station. The small plastic cup he had brought for tea sat near his boot on bare ground. It jittered in place with each tremor. Move, pause, move. The pattern from the night chart, only sharper. I crouched and touched the concrete with my gloved palm. A faint warmth bled through the material, like a floor above an engine room. "This is old work?" Lee asked, not quite believing it. "Plug is from the armistice period," I said, "before your father was born." He nodded, but the muscles at the corners of his mouth tightened. The engineers ran through their checklist. Power, recording, radio links back to the post. Every instrument told the same story. Something heavy was active beneath us, cycling in stages with a mechanic's regularity. "Orders are to confirm and clear," Lee said eventually. "We verify no friends are burrowed under us. Then we either seal it better or collapse it all the way. You stay topside and control your boys." His men set charges in drilled holes around the edges of the plug. Dust coated their sleeves. The hot pulse in the concrete climbed steadily. The tremors came often enough now that the loose gravel under my boots shivered each time. "Maybe we should call for someone with more stripes," Choi murmured. "If we send this up again, they'll just send bigger engineers," I said. "At least we know these ones." We pulled back behind a berm while the sappers wired the last charge and retreated with their firing box. Radio checks rippled along the line. "All clear, all clear." "Fire!" The blast was sharp. Rock chips pattered down around us. Dust rolled out and hung low. When it thinned, the plug lay in broken slabs, and the raw tunnel beyond gaped like a cut throat. Heat poured out, not the brief rush of an explosion, but a steady current from depth. It pressed against my eyes and ears. Fog formed where the warm air met the cool morning, spilling over the debris and around our boots in slow coils. The air felt wrong. Old tunnels usually breathed damp, mold, rot, chemicals, the sour weight of things left too long. This exhalation carried none of that. It felt filtered, stripped of every ordinary trace, as if some system in the dark had processed it and returned only a blank. "Ventilation is active," Captain Lee said under his breath. "That should be impossible." Our lights cut down into the opening. The first few meters matched old photographs, rough rock, crooked timbers, sandbags slumped with age. Then the walls changed. The rock turned smooth and curved, lined with metal braces that met in seamless joints. Old rusted girders had been fused into newer structures, the welds too clean for 1950 anything. Cables ran along the ceiling and walls in bundled lines. In some stretches they wore cracked rubber and cloth sleeves. A few steps later, they shifted into neat plastic jackets printed with codes and bar patterns. Some tags carried unit numbers and manufacture years from decades after the armistice. Others showed brands I had never seen. Light came from thin strips and nodes set into ceiling and walls. Some glowed a tired yellow. Others burned cold and clear. Sections ahead brightened as we advanced, while areas behind dimmed then reversed, as if the system kept changing its mind. "Any gas alarms?" I called over the radio. "Negative, all clear." Lee moved in first with 2 sappers. My squad followed, weapons ready, with the engineers behind us. The air pressure eased as we walked, but the distant thrum under our boots kept its rhythm. The tunnel twisted. Alcoves opened up on either side, carved out across different decades. Some held ammunition crates with cracked lids and faded Chinese characters. Others contained newer composite cases with clean hinges and stamped markings. Production lines from factories that, as far as I knew, had no business feeding this hillside. One crate of medical supplies lay open, bandages stacked in neat piles. The label strip caught my eye. A hospital supplier I recognized from a news story about defective dressings pulled from circulation. The lot number matched the graphic I had seen on television a week earlier. Maybe it's an old number reused, I muttered. Min looked at it and shook his head. That coding format is recent, he whispered. My knee brace from the clinic had the same style. They didn't use that layout when my father was young. We stood far below anything that should have seen last year's inventory. Our radios picked up static as we turned a corner, the kind that carries a pattern instead of random hiss. I caught clipped fragments of speech, too fast and layered to understand. The sapper at point twisted his earbud and frowned. "Getting traffic," he said. "Language, I can't pin it. Bits of a few." The tunnel widened into a junction. One branch dropped steeply, propped by old timber supports. The other ran level under modern braces and conduit. "Level first," Captain Lee ordered. "We start with something that doesn't involve ladders." We took the upper route. The floor was smoothed concrete, patched in places. Scuff marks and boot prints overlapped in layers, soles from different eras, some deep and sharp, some faint, as if they had never quite belonged to this version of the floor. At a bend, the wall opened into a side chamber. Stretcher frames lined both sides in welded racks, 3 high. Men lay strapped into them, hooked to machines I did not recognize. Their uniforms matched modern Chinese issue in outline, but every set of armor had been patched with plates and pieces that didn't match. Different shades, different materials, cut and bolted on wherever they fit. Their injuries looked catastrophic. Missing limbs, torn torsos, faces held together by tape and clamps. Devices wrapped around the damage, jointed like small exoskeletons, working in tiny increments as joints and bones realigned. Pumps cycled quietly, drawing fluids away and pushing them back in adjusted ratios. The whole room focused on keeping men functional, who, by any ordinary standard, had run out of chances. No voices rose from the stretchers. Pain held itself behind clenched jaws and blank eyes. The only sounds came from air running through hoses, pumps cycling, and the low buzz of power. A man in a worn medical coat glanced up from a chart. His gaze had the flat weight of someone who had lived like this for too many years. He looked straight at me, then at the patch on my arm. "South Army?" he asked in Korean. His accent was heavy, but his vocabulary came from my decade, not my grandfather's. "You're early this time." Rifles snapped up all around us. I had not seen the other soldiers at first. Figures in hybrid armor stepped out from recesses and corners, rifles raised, motions in sync. Their weapons were compact blocks of metal and polymer with transparent magazines. The rounds inside looked more like tiny assembled mechanisms than simple bullets. "Drop your weapons." The order came in Mandarin from one of them. My men hesitated just long enough to invite trouble. The nearest stranger closed the distance in 2 strides, twisted a rifle from a conscript's hands, and drove him to a knee with a boot between the shoulders. Another grabbed the captain's firing box and tossed it to the medic, who set it on a tray without much interest. "Do it," I snapped. "Weapons down, hands where they can see them." Metal clattered on concrete as my squad complied. The engineers followed, faces pale. They outnumbered us at close quarters. More importantly, they moved like people who lived here. We were visitors. They belonged. A man with an officer's posture stepped forward. His armor had more scratches than the others. A small metal frame hugged his left leg, articulating with each step to keep his stride smooth. He studied my name tape, then my face, as if trying to reconcile them with something older. "Lieutenant Park Hyun," he said in careful Korean. "Brigade 7, Southern Army. You finally reached the right door. I've never seen you before, I said. He gave a tired half smile. You wouldn't, he said. The last time we met, you wore a different name. They bound our wrists with plastic ties and relieved us of everything sharp, then marched us deeper into the tunnel. I tried to mark the route, counting turns, junctions, side chambers. It didn't help. The corridors looped and branched in ways that refused to stay still in my head. Sometimes we passed the same junction twice, but the details had shifted. A safety poster where there hadn't been one, a new crack, a stack of crates on the opposite side. After a while, I let the idea of a map go and focused on staying upright. They brought us to a room that looked like a command post, welded together from 3 different wars. Cracked whiteboards covered one wall, layered with maps and unit symbols. Plastic folders hung from hooks. A field radio unit sat on a crate next to an older set with heavy dials and faded markings. Photographs of faces in different uniforms were tacked to the metal supports, some smiling, some expressionless. The officer gestured for me to sit at a rough table. My wrists stayed tied. He pulled a folder from a stack and opened it. You filed a report through your chain of command, he said. Seismic activity, suspected infiltration, request for engineers. How do you know that? I asked. We monitor this corridor. We always keep an ear on it, otherwise we'd be gone already. He tapped the folder. Your message reached us later than we needed. That happens a lot. I sent it as soon as I saw the readings. I don't doubt your effort, he said. The trouble sits in time, not motivation. He turned the folder towards me. The paper inside had worn edges and faint smudges from many hands. On the top sheet, in my own handwriting, sat the report I had typed the night before. The date stamp field carried more than one line. Someone had written another date under the original, and under that, another, each in a different pen. How long have you had this? I asked. As long as we've been waiting for your army to break through that concrete, he said. Sometimes you arrive sooner, sometimes later, sometimes you never arrive. When that happens, the casualties on my board rearrange themselves, pressure shifts elsewhere. We adjust. I looked at the maps behind him. They showed the peninsula, but not the one from training posters. Coastlines had fresh bites taken out of them. Cities I knew carried lines through their names. Arrows traced campaigns back and forth across the same ground, layered in different colors. Symbols marked downed bridges, shattered ports, improvised supply routes. One board tracked formations by year and allegiance. Under a faded heading, I saw my grandfather's unit designation written in careful characters. Lines linked it to a scatter of marks around this valley. A note in the margin said in cramped script, collapsed tunnel, high casualties, unknown survivors. Further along, in a darker pen, I saw my own brigade number listed next to a small note in Korean. Arrives late, partial strength, outcome variable. You're telling me I'm part of the same fight as my grandfather, I said. Telling is generous. The officer gave a short laugh. Lieutenant, you're standing in the corridor he tried to burn shut. Your calendar flipped. The hillside never learned that trick. He introduced himself as Colonel Jiao. He claimed to be People's Liberation Army, medical and logistics, attached to a theater command that, as far as I knew, had never existed. For him, the war had never ended. It had stretched and folded, gained new fronts, lost old ones, but this hillside stayed as a fixed point where pressure built and vented. This complex is a forward node, he said. We receive wounded, stabilize what we can, send the rest deeper. We cache supplies, route them. When the corridor settles, units move through from your south as well as from our side. When it slips, he tilted his head toward the ceiling. Everything rearranges. Corridor? I asked. He tapped the concrete under his boot. This ground does not stick to one timeline, he said. Too many scars. Too much digging, blasting, bleeding in the same place. Sometimes paths line up. Sometimes they cross at bad angles. We learn to live with that. Your people still file this under heritage site. On our side, this is a sealed relic with a plaque, I said. He grimaced. You can't build a fence around pressure and expect it to vanish, he said. It goes somewhere. Usually it chooses the easiest fault line. He laid out their position with the calm of a quartermaster. The corridor, as he called it, linked multiple versions of the same front. His unit had slipped out of contact with its own rear years ago, by his reckoning. Supplies and reinforcements arrived in stuttering flows from Allied forces that didn't always match his own chain of command. Sometimes they came in uniforms his staff didn't recognize, carrying maps with different borders. Sometimes they came from our side, through cracks like the one we had opened. We keep track, he said. We mark which visitors bring trouble, and which bring medicine, which try to flood us and which just drop another plug and write a neutralized in their files. And what do you want from me? I asked. The same thing I have wanted from every officer in your uniform who made it to this room. Stable contact with your surface, enough cooperation to keep this path from shredding itself, and a little professional courtesy before someone drops a mountain on us. How many times have we dropped one? He glanced at a board near the door. Someone had taped a grid with lines for incidents. A column labeled Southern Demolitions carried a dense forest of tally marks. Often enough that certain radio codes give me knee pain, he said. They held us for what my watch called hours. The tunnel had its own opinion. My sense of time slipped between them. A guard eventually led me out to use a latrine. On the way back, I stopped at a board outside the medical bay. It carried a casualty list, organized by unit and operation. Names grouped under headings that meant nothing to me. Some looked Korean, others Vietnamese, Russian, American. A few had notes in pen beside them. Halfway down, under a faded operation name, I saw my family name written in Hangul. The given name matched my grandfather's. The rank matched too. An arrow from that line pointed to a note at the bottom. Structural collapse, no remains recovered. Further down, at the bottom of the board, my own name appeared under Brigade 7, marked as present, status pending. On the way back from the latrine, I glanced again. The ink on my grandfather's line should have been completely dry after all these years, but the arrow next to his name angled in a slightly different direction, as if someone had redrawn it to connect to another operation code. It felt like watching your reflection shift in a cracked mirror while you stood still. A day or two later, by my watch, Jiao called me back to the map room. "You want your men back," he said. "I want fewer demolition campaigns landing on my head. Let's see what can pass for a deal." The arrangement sounded simple on paper. He would release some of my people as a gesture. In return, I would act as liaison with my own command, explaining that the complex held an organized unit, not a tunnel gang or rogue miners. He expected no friendship. He wanted predictability. "You want me to convince my army to live with an enemy base under our feet," I said. "I want you to convince them to think before they fire charges into a system they don't understand," he said. "If they decide to kill us, they can at least do it with a clear grasp of the cost, instead of hiding behind plaques and old words like a neutralized." I thought about my squad chained to benches in a holding room. I thought about his medical staff moving around their wounded. I thought about the seismic station at our post, the lines on the graph stepping up in neat sequence. "I can talk to them," I said. "That's all I can promise." "That's always all," he said. "The rest belongs to the corridor." He cut my ties himself and handed back my uniform, minus pistol and rifle. My wrists cracked when I flexed them. "Your route back won't run straight," he warned. "We'll give you a guide to the limit of our chart. After that, you rely on your own scars and luck." We walked deeper before we turned upward. The air cooled. The lighting changed tone. At one junction, the guard guiding me scratched a mark on the wall with chalk, then watched as the line spread, thinned, and faded. "The corridor doesn't appreciate labels," he muttered. "At least it has a personality," I said. That makes it feel local." He didn't laugh. After 3 more turns, a vertical shaft opened above us, ringed with old climbing bolts. The guard pointed up. "Your side," he said. "Probably." At the top, a hatch waited, heavy and scarred. I turned the wheel and pushed. I expected familiar wire and towers. Instead, I stepped into a DMZ that looked like ours passed through several fires. The fence line was heavier, double layers of modern barrier with fresh razor wire. Old towers stood as charred skeletons, replaced by squat concrete boxes with new instruments on their roofs. A faint haze lay over the valley that didn't match the weather. In the distance, artillery spoke somewhere it shouldn't. The guard swore quietly, retreated down the ladder, and closed the hatch. "Wrong branch," he called up. "Try again." We climbed down, took another route, and came up through a different hatch under low brush on another slope. This time the air felt cooler and clean, the silence familiar. The fence ahead carried the right markings. The tower to the left had the same rust patch on its ladder where a conscript had spilled paint the previous year. Through binoculars, I saw one of my patrols working its way along the line. The posture, spacing, and lazy swing of the last man's rifle shouted routine. No one scanned for a missing platoon yet. "Go," the guard said. "Don't bring me into their view. That complicates everything." 2 of my men followed me, hauling the wounded engineer between them. I half slid down the slope, kept to the shadows of old concrete, and slipped back inside the perimeter through a maintenance culvert we used for cigarette breaks. It felt like coming home from a different country. At the sector post, the duty officer stared at me as if I had climbed out of the television. "You dropped off the net," he said. "We couldn't raise you. Most of the engineers never checked in. Battalion's been calling every half hour." "How long have we been gone?" I asked. "Morning patrol left yesterday," he said. "It's late afternoon now." My watch showed something slightly different. I let the discrepancy pass. We sent a team back to the hill, heavily armed and under strict orders not to enter. The plug was back in place, the rubble gone, but the opening looked like an old rock face that had never been touched. Cold concrete, undisturbed soil. The seismic station still showed movement, the same hillside patch pulsed. Movement in clustered packets, depth estimate unchanged. Battalion took over. Intelligence officers arrived by helicopter, the serious kind with neat haircuts and quiet voices. They isolated my surviving men and the wounded engineer we had dragged out on a stretcher. They took the small device Jiao had allowed us to carry, a box the size of a ration pack with connectors that matched none of our gear. The debrief lasted hours. They walked me through every step, every word, every landmark, then circled back and did it again. They never said they thought I was lying, but the repetition tried to find cracks. By the end, my own memories felt like worn stone. When it finished, a major with an intelligence badge stared at the folder in front of him for a while. "You understand how this reads," he said. "I understand it looks like something you don't want to file under your real name." He surprised me with a nod. "Exactly," he said. "Unfortunately for both of us, we now have physical evidence." He tapped where the strange device had sat. "And our own sensors back up your timeline, more or less. Something moves under that hill." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we push this out of your pay grade," he said. "Higher commands will argue about jurisdiction and ownership. Meanwhile, we need someone on the ground who knows what he saw and who can return if asked." "You want me back down there?" I said. "Eventually. Not today, not next week maybe, but we won't leave a hole like that unattended." "Colonel Jiao warned me about demolitions," I said. "He said big explosions down there twist things in ways neither side understands. He's an enemy officer running an unauthorized tunnel complex under our territory. We'll weigh his comments with the skepticism that deserves." Which meant they would ignore him until they needed a scapegoat. They let me out long enough to go home on a short pass. Officially, it was rest and recovery. Practically, it kept me away from the hill while people with more stars argued. My grandmother's apartment smelled of cleaning fluid and boiled rice. The same picture of my grandfather hung over the low table. She fussed with my collar, told me I'd lost weight, then sat opposite me with her hands wrapped around a chipped cup. "They sent you to his valley," she said. It sounded like a statement she had rehearsed alone. "There are many valleys," I said. "There's one that matters," she replied. "The one that kept him." I told her as much as I could within regulations. Seismic readings, old tunnels, engineers, the feeling that the hill's underlayers were still working. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she slid open a drawer under the table and took out a stack of old documents, letters, official notifications, a few creased photographs. "I didn't show these to your mother," she said. "She built her own life. You chose the army. You get the rest." One letter, stamped with war-era seals, described a tunnel incident in this valley. Unit names blurred by age matched the ones I had seen on Jiao's casualty board. Another document, an internal memo she was not supposed to have, mentioned repeated failures to fully secure enemy underground networks in the area, structural anomalies, recommendation for further study. "Every time they blew it, someone higher up declared it finished," she said. Then, after a few years, another notice arrived. New dead. New explanations. "Why keep these?" I asked. "Because the official story kept shifting," she said. "Dates, locations, causes. They never lined up from one letter to the next. I wanted one version that stayed fixed." She tapped the stack. "Paper stays where you put it. People rewrite everything else." Back at Battalion, the arguments had produced a plan. They called it a limited demolition and exploitation operation. The idea sounded neat. Reopen the complex, push in with a larger force, map what we could, grab anything worth studying, and place charges at key structural points to collapse the network in a controlled sequence. Controlled meant under their control, not the corridors. They wanted me as guide. "You know the layout better than anyone on our side," the major said. "You established contact with their commander. Use it." "He trusts me about as much as he trusts his leg brace," I said. "But he doesn't want the whole corridor shredded any more than you do. That's something." "We do want it collapsed," the major said. "We just want to decide how much and when." I tried to explain that the place did not behave like normal earthworks, that routes shifted, hatches opened onto different versions of the same slope, boards updated themselves. He listened, nodded, and then repeated a smoother version of the same line. "We'll manage the theory," he said. "You handle walking and pointing." I knew how institutions worked. If I refused, they would send someone else with less context and more enthusiasm. So I helped design the plan. We sketched the sections I remembered. I marked where we had seen the medical bay, command post, junctions. I pointed out stretches that felt load-bearing even to an infantryman. The engineers overlaid my guesses on old survey data and produced a set of primary and secondary demolition targets. "You're confident these points will take out large parts of the network?" the major asked. "Confidence doesn't belong under that hill," I said. "Those are the choke points. Hit them and you cause real damage." "And you can get our men clear before the charges go?" he asked. "I can try. That's the limit." We notified Jiao through a crude channel. From their side, contact points with our surface were few. Short-range radio bursts near certain rock faces, anomalous patterns we learned to recognize on our sensors. Each message felt like talking to someone through fractured glass. "You want to place charges in my house?" His voice came through one day, distorted but recognizable. "You expect me to help stack them?" "If we do this without you, we'll do it blindly," I answered. "You know that. You have more experience with collapse than we do." A long pause rasped along the carrier. "You're aiming to cut off the worst branches and leave a narrower path," he said. "A relief corridor with fewer exits." "That's the idea. You inherited your grandfather's confidence." All right, mark your points. We'll move wounded out of those sections where we can, but if you misjudge the timing—" His voice crackled. "The corridor doesn't always honor schedules. On the day of the operation, the valley looked like an exercise on paper and like a prelude in reality. Artillery units dug in behind ridges. Demolition teams checked gear until their hands stopped shaking. My squad carried more ammunition and medical kits than usual. The engineers from the first mission stood among a larger detachment, quiet now. Choi tightened his chin strap and eyed the hillside. Your grandfather tried to kill this place. That's the family story, I said. How'd that work for him? He didn't come home. Choi grunted. Maybe steer it instead of killing it this round. We opened the hill at a different spot, through a shaft the engineers believed connected to the same network. The plug here looked newer, poured in one smooth pour, fewer cracks. When the charges went off, the air pushed out like a held breath. Warm mist rolled over us, exactly like before, as if the hill accepted that its skin would be peeled back now and then. We went in fast. My squad first, then engineers with packs of explosives, then a second line of infantry. The tunnel swallowed us, and daylight narrowed behind. This time, I recognized more of the route. A junction, a side chamber. Familiar shapes kept appearing in altered configurations. Some details had moved. A crate sat where I remembered an empty alcove. A safety poster had different graphics. The bones stayed the same. Jiao's people met us near the junction where we had first seen the medical bay. They were fewer and carried the set expressions of people who had rehearsed disappointment. You brought a mountain with you, he said, glancing at the wires trailing from the engineers' packs. You said pressure prefers a path, I said. We're trying to give it one. We moved as one column. That was the compromise. My people in front and rear, his troops on the flanks, engineers in the middle. At pre-selected points, the sappers stopped to drill and plant charges. I watched each placement. A blast that sealed a passage in our world could open something worse in another. We aimed for structural nodes, not random walls. As we went deeper, the corridor responded. Sections we had walked earlier in the day changed length. A stretch between two painted marks on the wall grew by several meters without fresh scars. A door that should have opened to storage now revealed a dark void lined with unfamiliar brick. Casualty boards at junctions clattered against their mounts when the tremors rolled through. Names smudged, then settled into new columns. On one board, my own entries slid from present to under review, then back, the ink still shining. We don't linger near these, Jiao muttered when he saw me looking. They make men superstitious. The engineers worked with their shoulders hunched and their mouths tight. They drilled, set charges, taped wires along the floor, ran firing leads back to central boxes. Captain Lee checked each connection twice, lips moving as he counted. His sappers looked older than they had on their first visit. At the deepest planned point, the air thickened. The tremor underfoot sharpened into a pulse that felt like distant machinery winding up. This is the throat, Jiao said quietly. Your grandfather tried to send a flood through here. If he'd managed it, we wouldn't be talking. Does his name still move on your boards? I asked. More often than yours so far. We planted the last of the big charges at supports that looked older than all of us. Fused rock and slag, welded by heat instead of human tools. Wires snaked back along the floor, taped over where they crossed walkways. The plan was simple enough. Once all charges were set, the column would pull back in stages to safe zones. Firing would follow a sequence designed to steer the collapse along chosen paths. The timing had room for small delays, but not for arguments. The corridor never agreed to the plan. On the way back up, it started throwing reflections. At one junction, another column crossed our path at an angle. Same uniforms, same faces, same packs of explosives, but the line moved as if it couldn't see us. One of my conscripts grabbed my sleeve. Sir, do you see? I see it, I cut in. Eyes forward. Don't try to stare it into making sense. Further along, gunfire echoed from somewhere overhead. Short bursts, then silence, then the same bursts again with a different delay. No casings fell at our feet. The firefight belonged to another version of this tunnel. We walked under its shadow. Then the relief column arrived. I had heard Jiao use the term for stretcher trains and supply convoys that moved when the corridor aligned in his favor. On the map, we had built the demolition sequence around them, with empty zones by the time the firing line reached those supports. Reality arrived early. We rounded a bend and saw them ahead in the wide junction beyond our last demolition point. Rows of stretchers, carts loaded with ammunition and fuel, walking wounded leaning on each other. Medics called orders, wheels squeaked, the entire mass flowed into the space where we meant to drop ceilings and drive supports sideways. Jiao swore in his own language and pushed forward, yelling for them to turn back. The medics hesitated, caught between routine and sudden warnings. My radio crackled. A voice from Surface Command cut through. Phase 1 charges armed. Status on Phase 2. We were behind schedule. The firing sequence had moved to someone else's hands now. Delay, I barked. Repeat, delay. Friendlies in the blast zone. Static washed over the response, then cleared. Negative, the voice said. Sequence locked. Initiation in 3 minutes. Clear the area. 3 minutes did not match the number of meters and bodies in front of us. I grabbed Captain Lee's shoulder. Can you hold the deepest set? I asked. Fire the rest and keep those back until the junction clears? He shook his head. We chained the circuits for stability. We stagger detonation in time, not wiring. The network either fires or it doesn't. Partial firing means stray charges. Command had stacked too much political capital on this operation. A no detonation outcome would mean explanations and new scapegoats. They would run the sequence. If we stayed, we would be buried. If we tried to save everyone, we would freeze and be buried with them. I looked at the stretchers, at my own men, at Jiao's thin line of veterans. I thought about my grandfather's name sliding between columns on a board. War rarely offers clean choices, only versions of damage. Pull our people back, I told Choi. Now, no debates. Anyone who can move helps someone who can't. We clear this junction before the first charge goes. What about them? Choi jerked his chin toward the relief column. They have their own officers, I said. We barely keep our own upright. He didn't like it, but he started shouting. My squad closed around the engineers and dragged them along the marked route. Behind us, Jiao's staff tried to turn their wounded out of the blast zone into side passages that might not exist tomorrow. The tremor underfoot climbed into a steady roll. Somewhere above, a clock counted down. 2 minutes, the radio reported. Mark. I could have dropped the handset in a puddle. It wouldn't have changed anything. We hit the first safe zone as the world tore itself sideways. The explosions arrived as a series of blows, each one rearranging a different part of the tunnel. The floor tilted, straightened, then shifted laterally like a ship taking heavy seas. Lights died in strips. Others flared bright, then snapped off. Dust poured down and hung in layers. Behind us, rockfalls thundered. Supports cracked like breaking bones. Screams cut through the mechanical roar, then ended mid-note. Pressure waves rolled past and bounced from places we had never seen. My ears filled with a deep roar, then cleared in jerks. I grabbed the wall, caught myself, and kept moving. Stopping meant letting the structure choose our slot in its new design. We reached a higher junction where the roof still held. A casualty board there banged against its fittings. Names blurred into streaks and then resolved again. My grandfather's entry now sat under an operation name that matched the code for this demolition. My own line shifted to a column labelled "Survived with Conditions." Secondary charges went off deeper inside. The shockwaves came softer but stranger. The tunnel ahead narrowed, then opened, then forked into branches that hadn't existed an hour earlier. Some ended in fresh rockfalls. Others revealed rooms fused from old galleries and alien geometry. We lost people in the churn. A conscript dropped out of sight when the floor under him crumbled into a shaft. A sapper stepped into a curtain of dust and didn't come out again, as if he had walked sideways into a version of the corridor that refused to hold his weight. At one turn, the column split. Half my squad and most engineers ended up in a branch that sloped upward. The rest, including Jiao, vanished behind a fold of rock that locked itself in place between heartbeats. "Do we go back?" Choi rasped. "If we turn now, we run into the next collapse from the wrong side," I said. "We get out with who we have, then we see who remains to argue with." We climbed until the air thinned and cooled. A hatch appeared above us in a section of roof no survey had ever labelled. It opened into a drainage culvert on the southern side, lined with stained concrete. We spilled out onto the hillside like rats chased from a drain. The valley looked normal on the surface. Fences stood in their places. Towers watched the same sectors. The hill had settled slightly, as if someone had laid a heavy hand on it and then let go. Artillery units sat in their pits with barrels at rest. Crews stared as we staggered into view. An officer ran toward us, then swallowed his first 15 questions and started counting heads instead. We had gone in with more than 3 squads and a full engineer detachment. We came out with barely 2 squads worth of bodies, some of those wobbling. Command called the operation a partial success. Their metrics ran simple. The seismic station now showed altered patterns. The long regular tremors had fractured into shorter, uneven bursts. Some sectors under the hill lay quiet, others flared unpredictably. Reports declared the most dangerous sections of the complex collapsed. Casualty lists carried standard lines about sacrifice. No one mention of names on Jiao's boards, or of the fact that the corridor still moved. I expected a reprimand for improvising. Instead, the major handed me promotion paperwork. "You made the call we trained for," he said. "You protected the lives you could realistically extract. That's what leadership looks like." "I left people under a roof we helped bring down," I said. He shrugged. "They're not our people. They're enemy personnel running an illegal network. Our first obligation stays with our own." They fenced off the hillside with new wire and installed warning signs with updated language. The memorial stone gained a fresh plaque describing the recent action in neutral sentences. Official tours steered elsewhere. Paperwork moved upward into compartments I would never see. Some fragments drifted back down. One file contained orders for a new unit, small and specialized, to monitor the anomaly and maintain contact. My name sat at the top of the assignment list. "You know the ground," the major said. "You have rapport with the other side when they answer. You understand discretion. You're exactly what this slot needs." "Is refusal on the menu?" I asked. "No, but you can tell your grandmother you volunteered if that makes home visits easier." It didn't, but I signed. From outside, my new work looked a lot like the old. I still walked fences. I still checked cameras. I still kept conscripts from staging dramas near the wire. The difference ran under my boots. We installed better sensors over the hill. Fiber lines, ground probes, equipment that belonged in a research institute more than an infantry sector. We turned a forgotten bunker into a monitoring room with its own locks. On a screen, the corridor's motion displayed as patterns most people would dismiss as noise. To me, it looked like a system breathing. They cut a new access point too. Not a grand tunnel, just a narrow shaft with a secure door at the bottom, tied into a section of the network that had survived the demolition. We didn't use it often. Going down felt like visiting a relative in intensive care. The first time I descended after the operation, the tunnel felt smaller. Sections we had walked before had vanished entirely. Others had shrunk to single-file squeezes. The medical bay from our first visit lay behind a collapsed stretch, its presence hinted only by a thin crack that exhaled warm air. We met Jiao again months later by my calendar, on a catwalk above a trench where new supports went in. His leg brace had changed, newer and slimmer. His face carried more lines. "You damaged us," he observed. "Not enough to erase us." "I don't have the authority to erase you," I said. "Only to help reshuffle rubble." He eyed the insignia on my uniform, the badge of an unnamed unit. "You joined the corridor's maintenance crew," he said. "Welcome. We now share a job description." I never wanted this job. Very few of us did. The work still landed here. We talked about practical things. How to avoid triggering new collapses when patrols moved. How to spot branches that linked to particularly bad fronts. How to time movement so that casualty trains didn't get stranded halfway between versions of the same valley. We didn't mention my grandfather. His name sat on both our boards now, anchored to this hillside in every reality that mattered. Off duty, when I went home, my grandmother's documents carried small changes. The memo about incomplete tunnel collapses bore an extra stamp with a recent date. The official letter describing my grandfather's last operation used a different label for the engagement, one that matched the code word in our current files for the demolition I had just helped plan. The memorial stone in our hometown included new incidents at the same valley, folding his sacrifice into a longer chain. "See?" my grandmother said when I pointed it out. "They keep touching the story. They can never stop adjusting." "You notice every revision," I said. "Someone should," she replied. "Paper stays where you put it until someone moves it. Then you know they're working on your memory." I didn't tell her that somewhere under the hill, a casualty board made those adjustments by itself. Most nights my work looks ordinary from the outside. I walk the perimeter. I log trespasses. I enforce the rules about photographs and drones. The conscripts grumble about boredom and cramped barracks. When the ground begins its familiar sequence, I go to the monitoring room. The seismic traces blossom across the screens in neat packets. Movement, pause, movement. Sometimes the pattern matches one we've catalogued. A minor shift, a supply run, a local cave-in. Sometimes it stutters in new ways, announcing that the corridor has found a fresh angle on its own history. When the timing lines up with one of our access windows, the secure phone rings. Someone with more rank but less mud on their boots asks for a situation report, while half drafting their next memo. I answer. I give them enough to keep funding the sensors and the fences. I don't pretend we control the hill. At best, we file our version fast enough that the official story doesn't drift too far from what we actually saw. Some nights I sit alone in the monitoring room with the lights low, screens glowing, equipment humming. The tremor under my boots feels like a heartbeat when I let my mind wander, but I try to keep it mechanical. The ground shifts because men keep digging and bleeding into it. I'm not special. I happened to be the lieutenant on duty when the charts started to move. I made choices a dozen other officers would have made in my place. I saved the people within reach and left the rest in the hands of their own commanders and their own physics. My grandfather tried to bury this place. I helped turn it into something you can schedule and log. When the next tremor cycle starts, I pick up my pen and write the time in the book. The numbers fill the columns in straight rows. Somewhere under the hill, boards and folders adjust to match. The valley stays quiet on the surface. Tour buses roll through other sectors, tourists raise phones toward watchtowers, and the country tells itself that the war rests. Under the scrub and fences and stones, the corridor keeps working. My job is to watch it, record it, and help my own army decide which versions of the story it can stand to live with. That is all.